One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battle-Born Progress. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battle-Born Progress. We are so happy to have you again tonight, like we always are, here at 5 o'clock on Out in Front. So tonight we are talking about capping insulin and what that means to real people here in Nevada, but also what that means to Americans all across the country. I know there's been a lot of action on this topic this week federally, but we've also been doing a lot of work on this issue here locally as well. So we have some amazing panelists tonight to talk to you about this critical issue affecting so many folks. So joining us this evening, we have Will Fisher. He is a lobbyist with the Lower Drug Prices Now campaign. We work with them a lot on many different issues, so we're excited to have him. We also have Jamie Tedgrinsky, I think I got that right, teacher and community member. Jamie, I'm sorry if I butchered that. We also have former senator and now chief of staff to Governor Sisolak, Ivana Kinsella. She is one of my heroes. I love her to death. And one of my other favorite senators, Senator Fabian Dugnate. So thank you all for joining us. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. So Will, I want to bring you in first. You know, there's a lot of work being done federally. So describe to us what Lower Drug Prices Now is doing to push the Biden-Harris administration towards legislation that lowers drug costs for Americans. And what are the most promising bills or executive actions that you think are achievable in the short term?
Annette, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody out there joining us today. I'm terribly excited to be here with you tonight. I would begin by saying, you know, not a lot of pushing required with the Biden-Harris administration. We have repeatedly seen President Biden and Vice President Harris out there talking to constituents, talking to the American people, talking about things that we need to do that are common sense steps we can take to lower costs for people. And a cheap way we can lower costs for people is by lowering the price of prescription drugs. And we have right now a once in a lifetime opportunity through the reconciliation package to move truly transformative policies that are going to demonstrably improve the lives of people throughout Nevada and throughout the country. And I think it's important to note that the four main components of the Build Back Better bill that passed out of the House in the fall passed with four key drug pricing provisions. And those include inflationary penalties, for companies that increase the price of prescription drugs faster than the rate of inflation. It includes out-of-pocket caps for seniors in Part D. It includes insulin caps at $35 per month for anyone with on Medicare or with private insurance. And most important, it for the very first time allows Medicare to directly negotiate what the price they pay is for certain drugs. This is a huge deal. Medicare is the largest purchaser of prescription drugs anywhere in the world. And as the law is currently written, Medicare is forbidden from negotiating what they pay for the price of prescription drugs, the same drugs that you go out and buy every day. And as a result of that, Americans pay 3 times more for brand name drugs than people in other countries. So we truly have this once in a generation opportunity. And what's so exciting, particularly for everybody out there listening, I know everybody's always looking for good news, is the drug pricing package that emerged from the House that is currently being negotiated as part of the ongoing conversation around reconciliation. The drug pricing provisions have the public support of all 50 Democratic members of the United States Senate and more than 218 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and are enthusiastically supported by the Biden-Harris administration. And I would just say, since we started talking about capping insulin costs and some of the legislative activity that's happened this week, 75% of the Nevada congressional delegation supported those efforts. I'll let you all take a guess who didn't. I'm not sure what his excuses were. I think he, once again attacked it as stifling innovation and government price setting, while you have people like Dina Titus and Steve Horsford and Susie Lee who recognize that what it is, a positive step towards a much larger program that we have to see through to the finish line. Again, once in a generation opportunity through reconciliation to make something big happen.
And Will, we talk a lot in the work that I do with you all, with Lower Drug Prices Now, with HCAN, Healthcare for America Now. We do a lot of work with you all because healthcare, prescription drugs are so important to Nevadans. It's one of the top polling issues consistently on the issues that we work on every single day. And, we talk a lot about the need to lower all prescription drug prices, but the focus has really been on those insulin drug prices. Talk to me about why that is and why the focus has been so much on that particular drug.
Well, one, I think it's, look, everybody seems, I certainly do, I feel like everybody knows someone who takes insulin, right? And I think it is a high name ID. Right. So in addition to being something that basically everyone has someone in their lives who depend on insulin, people hear it, know what it is, understand that it is a life-saving medication. And also we have seen stories repeated over and over and over, year after year after year, about the crazy escalation in prices that we have seen for insulin. This is a drug that's more than 100 years old. The people who discovered it had no interest in profiting from it. And yet, because drug corporations in the United States have monopoly power to raise the prices on prescription drugs whenever they choose to, we have seen the cost of insulin steadily increase. And there's been a tremendous campaign led by insulin patients and their advocates and allies in recent years. And I don't think it should come as a surprise to anybody that it has been so highlighted throughout this debate.
Absolutely. And Will, just one more question before we kind of go to our next speaker, because we actually have somebody on with a story tonight who has lived this, right? Both of my parents are diabetics. Both of them have relied on insulin. So I know this well in my family. I know this issue, it impacts me directly, right? And it, like you said, it impacts so many Americans and so many Nevadans as well. So what do polls or research show about the public's interest in lowering drug costs? And are these plans popular? And what do we need to do to reach these folks and engaging the public in making this change? Because this change needs to happen. I mean, it's far overdue, and we need to do something to make this change now.
I'm not sure if bunnies poll more positively than lowering drug prices do. It across the board. 91% of voters in polls I've seen say that action on prescription drugs will have a major impact on their vote in the fall. This includes 82% of Democrats, 72% of Republicans, 77% of Republicans, because everybody gets sick. Everybody needs prescriptions. Everybody is feeling the pains right now of inflation and things like that. And one of the top things we can do to ease those inflation concerns that people are having right now is going after drug pricing reform, making this happen. There's a support for it. It's common sense. And I would just say we're already doing it, right? There are examples on the local level. I know Nevada is part of the Northwest Drug Consortium, but we don't even have to, sitting here in Washington, D.C., we don't even have to go that far to see positive examples of where drug price negotiation, for example, is already working. I am an enrollee in the VA healthcare system. The VA healthcare system has the ability to negotiate what they pay for prescription drugs. And guess what? The Department of Veterans Affairs pays on average 54% less for the same prescription drug that Medicare Part D does. Think about that. Same drug being purchased from the same company by the same government. And one agency pays 54% less than another because that one agency, in this case, the Department of Veterans Affairs, has the ability to negotiate what they pay for those drugs.
Thank you for that. Well, we're going to come back to you in just a few minutes. I want to go to Jamie very quickly. Jamie, you and I have been friends now for a little while. I've had an opportunity and the privilege to learn about your story. Like I said, you're a teacher, you're a community advocate. We were joking before the show started that you should be at the school board meeting tonight, but you're instead here with us sharing your story as one of our storytellers for our story bank. So talk to us about your story and your struggle with the cost of prescription drugs and what that's meant to your life.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I think the school board might be a little relieved I'm not there tonight because I am a frequent speaker about what health insurance in Nevada, especially Southern Nevada, looks like for so many of us. I have type 1 diabetes, so I am completely insulin dependent. My body doesn't make any on its own. And I've been that way since I was 14. So I was a sophomore in high school when I was diagnosed. So I had to kind of navigate going through puberty and going through high school with this chronic illness. And it was not easy, and it's still not easy. I'm in my 30s now. I've spent more than half my life with this disease with no cure in sight. So I know the ins and outs of life with diabetes, the highs and the lows. Quite literally, just this afternoon, I was correcting a low, like my sugar is going low, and I'm like, she's in here like shaking, tired, all the kind of stuff that goes when you're hypoglycemic. But what happened with me is that my parents' insurance wasn't able to pay for my insulin. It was completely unaffordable, even with insulin. So I was declared medically independent from my parents when I was 16 so that I could get on Medicaid in the state of Pennsylvania so that I could afford my insulin and so that I could afford to get on an insulin pump. And I stayed on Medicaid through Pennsylvania, all through college, all through graduate school, until I moved out to Nevada in 2015. And I got on to Teachers Health Trust with the Clark County School District. And for the past 7 years, I've had lots of struggles. A lot of diabetic teachers and their family members have had those struggles finding an endocrinologist. There aren't many endocrinologists out here. So trying to find a doctor and then a wait time to get in and then access to the medication. Part of the reason why I go to the school board so often is that our health insurance just is not great. And people get angry at me for saying our health insurance is not great. And then I get angry, well, I'm the one who's not being provided for. Without insulin, I will die. And that's not being over dramatic. That's just, if I don't have insulin, if a diabetic goes without insulin, within a week, they'll be in a coma, they'll die. And there have been times where I'm sitting here 10 years into a professional career, sitting here with 4 college degrees, relatively stable in an unstable economy, where I have had to decide, do I ration my insulin? Do I buy groceries? Do I pay my rent on time? And there have been times when I cannot do all 3 of those. And there have been times where my dinner is sleep because sleep doesn't cost me insulin, or where I have skipped meals or I have skipped doses, and I have dealt with the complications of having a high blood sugar because I don't have access to what I need to bring it down. I have a fantastic medical team who has been with me through all the issues that we've gone through with insurance the past 7 years. I'm very lucky that he is a medical professor and he owns his own company, so he can let me go without paying sometimes. His office provides me a medication that Teachers Health Trust won't pay for that I need, and that would be thousands of dollars out of pocket. But I'm lucky because I am geared into a network and I'm keyed in with a bunch of people who can help. I have family who have been able to help me in the past, but thousands of people don't have that. I've seen 7 GoFundMe's in the last year of diabetics who are trying to crowd raise money for their insulin. And it cost about $10 to make a vial of insulin. And it costs about $450 on the market right now. With insurance, right now, my costs out of pocket are about $200 to $300 a month for insulin and for some of the medical devices for test strips to maintain like the machine, the glucose machine that I use. I wear a device called a Dexcom, which helps record my blood sugar. But right now, I can't afford an insulin pump. An insulin pump would cost me about $7,000 to $8,000 out of pocket, even with insurance. And so because of that, instead of taking one insulin with the machine, I have 3 different insulins. One that I take every time I eat a meal or I have a high blood sugar, one that I take once a day as a long term, and then one that I take once a week that helps regulate hormones that make me need less insulin. But you know, it's very problematic. I've been through dozens of different medications trying to find one that works, one that's inexpensive. And it kind of sucks to kind of sit there and hear an auditing company say, well, according to our numbers, you should need this, because I'm not a number in a system. I am a person. I have a family. I have a classroom with hundreds of kids who need me. And I'm constantly being told, well, our numbers say this, or we're not covering this, or this insulin is $3 cheaper, so we're going to switch you. And I'm allergic to that insulin. And then my endocrinologist has to write a letter saying they're allergic to this. If you make them take this, they will die slower, but they'll still die. And it gets very frustrating to live in a country as wealthy as America is, and to struggle to provide, and to know that people my age and younger are dying because they can't get access to this, because some guy in a distant office in Washington, D.C. says, nope, I'm not voting for it. You know, I'm a person, I'm not a number, but my life has been regulated to numbers. I can tell you in the past 16 years, how many insulin shots I've done, how many finger pricks, how many blood draws I've had to have. Those are numbers that matter to me, because without those numbers, I'm not here. But to say that, you know, $400, $500 for insulin, that's just absolutely insane to me. Banting and Best, when they discovered insulin, they sold it for $1. that, you know, they sold the patent for $1 because they said, we want people to have this. And now it's just a game of who can make the most money. And they don't care how many backs is built off of and how many people are dying or living in poverty or going bankrupt simply because we want the opportunity to live.
Yeah. So, Jamie, just to follow up on that, what would capping insulin prices? You were just on a show, KNPR, a few weeks ago with Congresswoman Titus talking about this. What would capping insulin prices mean to you in your everyday life? You just said some of it, but how would that change your life?
It gives realistic goals for us. It allows us to budget. It alleviates some of that worry about, can we afford it? Right? If I know that my insulin is $35, if it's going to be $35, I can do $35. I can pay for that. Even someone who is not as economically stable, you know, $35, that's a doable price. This also, because right now, like, no caps on insulin prices, it doesn't take into account anything else. It doesn't take into account if you have other medical needs that you're also paying for. It doesn't take into account just daily life that you're paying for. So you're kind of stuck here juggling a budget that is never going to be the same. And that stability is super important for diabetics, right? Like, I'm on a schedule. I know when I need this. I know when I need that medication. I know what happens. My finances also do better on a schedule. And just taking away that fear that I won't be able to afford my insulin and my rent, or I won't be able to afford test strips and my rent, or I won't be able to afford my Dexcom and my car insurance. Things like that, that really matters to us. And I think that matters to so many people. And this also paves the way for us to look at the medical industry as a whole and say, what else is being overpriced? What else is killing people in a first world nation that should not be killing people? And it allows us to overhaul the system and look at what actually can be done. We're putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, and we need to revamp everything. And I think insulin is a good place to start.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, Ivana, I want to bring you in. Before you worked as the governor's chief of staff, you did so much. You were a pioneer in Nevada on this issue of prescription drug pricing. You took on pharma interests when few others would. You blazed a revolutionary trail on what would on this issue. So what drove you to get involved in the prescription drug issue, and what advice do you have for others on standing up to powerful moneyed interests, especially pharma?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me, Annette. It's really great to be connected, not only on this topic, but for all the work you do to keep folks engaged is so important. And it's stories like Jamie's that are so hard to accept as realities, not only in this country, but just as it's just wrong. It's wrong. And Jamie, it's because of stories like yours. It's because patients like you spoke up in 2017. It's because of people like you who every day are saying enough is enough. And here are the realities of what my life looks like. Here are the realities that a lack of action places on my life, on my family's life, that we are in a position to have federal action, that the state of Nevada was able to lead the country on drug pricing transparency. It takes putting a face to a problem and having people be brave enough to share their stories, to have creative solutions materialize and come to life. For me, it's stories like Jamie's that motivated me as a legislator to want to tackle this issue. And Jamie's story is unfortunately not unique. It happens every day in communities across the state. What we learned in what was now older data, but has been recently updated, so the Kaiser Foundation found 1 in 4 people with diabetes ration their insulin. And when you think about that, that doesn't just mean that that individual is making a decision for themselves. It means an entire family could be put at risk. A community is at risk, because when people aren't able to care for themselves, they can't care for those around them. So this isn't just an issue that affects people with diabetes. It affects people who love them, it affects people who know them, and it affects people who work with them. And so to me, it was just critical to get involved. And I wasn't sure how long I would be in the legislature. I'd recently been appointed, and I thought I will either do hard things because I'm in a safe district where I have that privilege, or I will be here for one session and I will go down in a blaze of glory trying to do my best. So I landed somewhere in the middle, and I really appreciate people like Jamie who supported me in getting legislation done.
I think your blaze of glory was quite a good one. So I want to talk to you about that bill that you passed. So during your time as a state senator, you passed SB 539, which was the first in the nation diabetes drug transparency bill. And we were so proud to support you on that. What made you want to tackle that issue, and what did that bill specifically do? I think it's important for folks to understand how Nevada was actually ahead on this issue, as we usually are on things.
So the challenge with state level drug pricing policy is much of drug pricing policy relies on federal law. There are decades of patent law, for example, that make it really challenging for states to enter the manufacturing enterprise of prescription drugs. There are countless cases on the Commerce Clause that protect trade secrets and protect the kind of information that states can access on things like research and development costs. And what we did was say, step one as policymakers is we need data to tell us what's happening in Nevada on prescription drug costs. And while we can't look at all drugs, let's look at it. Let's look at drugs that affect a large number of Nevadans and have what we know to be real problems when it comes to pricing. And that's how we landed on diabetes drugs as the first area that we'd look at. And initially, the legislation looked at only the manufacturer side of the issue, and we looked at we asked manufacturers to disclose a series of data, and there was initial language that said, should drugs increase above CPI, above the Consumer Price Index, that would trigger a cap, a cost cap. That created all sorts of commerce challenge questions, so that piece came out. And the initial bill was actually vetoed despite bipartisan support. And actually, when it was vetoed, the veto message said, don't just focus on manufacturers. There's a whole drug pricing chain that should be looked at. And so I worked with the Republican minority leader, and we included pharmacy benefit managers into the language. And we also included healthcare nonprofits because there's data that shows there are a number of healthcare nonprofits that do great work, but that in some cases, because of funders and because they can be leveraged by, in some cases, pharmaceutical companies, that they may not advocate on patients' best interests. And so we included language that tried to look at all pieces of the drug pricing chain and also included pharmaceutical sales reps, because one of the key pieces of transparency that was left out of the Affordable Care Act was looking at pharmaceutical sales reps and things like the samples they leave behind. And in doing so, we created an incredibly robust bill that aimed to create transparency and shed light on the entire drug pricing enterprise. We went to court, not a surprise that once it was out of the legislature's hands and once it had been signed into law, that manufacturer associations challenged the law in court. And we were able to settle, and then the settlement language was challenged and recently struck down by the state Supreme Court. So the bill went really far and was later watered down in the courts. So we have more work to do to enhance transparency, but it started a discussion that I think caught national fire and was a catalyst to where we're at today.
I couldn't agree more. I think it really started the conversation. So Senator Donate, I want to bring you in now because I want to talk about the future. You obviously have a public health background. And you have done a lot on various issues around healthcare and things like that in your time in the state Senate. So what work has the state Senate done in the previous legislative session to help with healthcare issues? And I specifically hope you talk about the one bill that we got to work on together last session.
Sure. And thank you so much, Annette. I just want to, before I even begin talking about what the legislature has done, let me just also share my appreciation for Jamie and her personal story on this issue that I know many families face, including my own. I always share that the reason why I went into public health is because as a young teenager, I was there when my dad got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I was the one that had to translate for him. And so from that moment on, I decided that I didn't want anyone else to have to experience this. And so that's why I chose to focus on public health. But I'm also excited to talk about this issue because I get to speak alongside my predecessor, Senator Cancela, who, of course, we've heard today already that she has led on this issue. And we continue to build on her work and her legacy. Last session, there are a lot of issues that we talked about with regards to drug prescriptions, but the ones that stood out the most was particularly with Senate Bill 380. And that one is going to expand the current drug price transparency program, not just for asthma or diabetes, but for other medications. And then also we passed Senate Bill 396, which allowed the state to enter into collaborative agreements with other states and jurisdictions on the purchasing of pharmaceutical drugs. Governor Sisolak already announced that we have joined a compact agreement for this, and that itself was finally going to deliver the relief that we need for our patients. Looking to the future as to what we can expect, in healthcare, we always talk about the value of, or the movement of value-based care. And, that has often been seen as a threat to a lot of institutions and organizations because for once, we don't look at the fees or the money that we're pulling in. We look at the quality that we deliver for our patients and how those costs can sometimes become barriers to access to care. But I think there's a lot of work that could be done. And of course, we're not done yet. So I'm just excited to see where we can lead this off. And, at the bottom line, when we think about the issues that impact our families the most, especially for the most vulnerable communities like our Black and Latino families, this is it. As a healthcare administrator, I see this on the front lines every day. And it saddens me when my patients tell me that they have to ration their drug prescriptions because they simply can't afford it. And that should be unacceptable because if we really want to dedicate ourselves to the mission of public health, which is to reach health for all, then we have to bring cost and affordability at front and center. So hopefully I'm excited to see the work that we have ahead and hope to be a part of that process.
And before we move to kind of the future, also talk to us about the public option bill, because that's one of the things I'm most proud of that came out of last session. That was Senator Canizaro's bill, and that is also going to hopefully be put into place. It has a several year ramp because it takes time and energy to really make sure that that's done right. But that public option bill is one of only a handful of states that only a handful of states that have done that. And it's something I'm very proud to have worked on with you all.
That's right. Yeah. So Nevada became, I believe, the second one of three states that has passed the public option when we passed it last year. It's going to take about 5 years to enact. Right now, we're in the process of completing an actuarial study, which is going to look at the impacts of how we roll it out. But our goal is to build on access to care, and it's to reduce the uninsured rate that we have in our state. For me, at my clinic, the issue that I encounter plenty of times is undocumented folks able to register for health insurance. And so they have to often pay that out of pocket. They don't have the luxury to get health insurance. And that's a story that we see persistently in the state of Nevada. We have one of the highest uninsured rates. And it's unfortunate, but because of the public option, we are finally making strides to fixing that barrier. And so I'm excited to see how it turns out. And although it is 5 years, we still have some changes that we can implement to help make that a realization. So it's really exciting to be in this particular space.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So let's talk specifically though about pharmaceutical companies, because I think that really is where Nevada has to go next, right? Especially with our population having such a high uninsured rate. Until we can get that public option in place because of the ramp that's there, we are going to have to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable and get those prices down so that people like your father and like Jamie can afford their medications. So what can the legislature specifically do to hold big pharmaceutical companies accountable for jacking up prices on medicine that people like Jamie desperately need?
Yeah, so with regards to so the first step, of course, is to build on the price transparency program, which is what the legislature has done last session. And then once we have that, then we have the mechanisms in place thanks to the Patient Protection Commission and other policymakers or folks behind the scenes that can actually start writing legislation to reduce those costs. That's essentially what we're trying to target next. Senator Cancela mentioned a really good example of something that goes in as part of the practice of selling drugs, but isn't really talked about, which is the gifts that physician groups or offices get. As you know, I have been in situations myself where I will be in my office and my staff come and ask me, what Starbucks order do you want? And I go, why are you asking me for my Starbucks order? And it's like, oh, it's because a pharmaceutical representative that's in the front office is asking for everyone's Starbucks order because they're about to buy a Starbucks. And that's not okay in my perspective. And that contributes to the overall cost of drugs prescriptions. So there are some bills that are out there and policies that we can implement and start to engage on. And so that's essentially what we have to start looking forward to, and essentially to limit the cost of drugs.
Thank you for that. All right. Well, so I want to come back to you. How can we effectively push back on big pharma's talking points as we educate people about the policies to lower drug costs? And we saw this a lot when we were navigating our public option bill last session. The big insurance companies came in and said, oh my God, the sky's going to fall. Everything's going to be terrible. The cost of health insurance is going to skyrocket. And we know that these health insurance companies made all of this stuff up, right? Like they set up literally front groups to like make these talking points. And big pharma does the same thing. So how do we push back on this misinformation, in my mind, and their lies, and really set the record straight? Because people like Jamie are desperate for these measures.
You are, and they exploit that desperation. Right. I think that should be, I don't think that's a shock to anybody on here, but it needs to be said repeatedly. Look, this is the most profitable industry on the S&P 500. Pharma could lose $1 trillion in revenue and still be the most profitable industry on the S&P 500. Again, just in case you think you misheard me, pharma could lose $1 trillion in revenue and still be the most profitable industry on the S&P 500. And the only way we're going to be able to break that is by breaking the monopoly power that pharma has right now to set and raise prices when at their whim, right? We have already seen a tremendous number of drugs that have increased already this year, many beyond the rate of inflation. And that's what, going back to what I was talking about earlier, and I'm got to say again, you have such champions in Nevada, right? In Senator Rosen, in Senator Cortez Masto, in Congressman Horsford, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Titus, people who are using every opportunity they can, whether that's at a hearing or a town hall, to talk about the need to get this done for the people in Nevada and the people of this country. And that starts with seizing this opportunity to pass this drug pricing provision package that at the top of that includes Medicare having the ability to negotiate drug prices. Because on one hand, we talk about things that increase affordability. And that's things like a price cap on insulin. That's things like a cap on out-of-pocket costs for people who are enrolled in Medicare Part D. Then there are policies that reduce prices. And the two that are part of this package that hits right on are the inflation caps and Medicare negotiations. And by making this happen, again, in addition to the champions you have there in Nevada, these four policies that I just mentioned as a package in reconciliation have the support of all 50, public support of all 50 Democratic members of the Senate and more than 218 members of the House. But I think that the more and more that we can talk, it was so awesome to hear so much about transparency, right? There is very little in pharma. There's very little talk about the $6 billion that pharma spends on television advertising every year and then turns around and writes off. There's very little talk about the hundreds of millions of our dollars that go into developing prescription drugs that then we get turned around and price gouge when we want to purchase drugs that our very tax dollars help to create. And I think the most important thing, though, at the end of the day, is people like Jamie and other patients telling their stories every single chance they get, because that's what's going to move people more than anything. And it's going to remind them not only of that story, but of the story of their son, their daughter, their mother, their father, their brother or sister, their colleague at work, so on and so forth. And that's it.
So, do you think Congress can learn from initiatives like we've had here in Nevada, or the fact that Governor Sisolak, and we're going to talk more about this with Ivana, that Governor Sisolak just put us into the Northwest Drug Consortium to adopt drug price negotiation policies at the federal level? Can the federal government, for once, follow the example of the states like they should on so many issues?
Yeah, and like I said at the top of my comments, even following the lead of other federal agencies, right? Again, the Department of Veterans Affairs pays 54% less for the exact same drug than Medicare Part D does. 54% less. Why? Because the Department of Veterans Affairs has the ability to negotiate what they pay for prescription drugs, something that Medicare has been legally forbidden from being able to do since 2003.
Thank you for that, Will. So, Jamie, I want to come back to you. What message do you feel that lawmakers need to understand about patients like yourself? I mean, you told so much of your story, but what would you say to a member of what have you said to a member of Congress? Because you were on with one the other day on KNPR, like I said, who maybe, but that one was for this legislation. But what would you say to one like Congressman Mark Amodei, who opposed this critical legislation?
I mean, yeah, I was fortunate to speak with Congresswoman Titus, who has been and is such a great ally for so many great causes that I care about. But I just kind of sit there and look in exasperation at our Congress members sometime. And I teach political science. So like, my kids are very tuned into what's happening, both at the state level and at the federal level. And at the end of the day, I just want Congress to see us. When you're sitting there in Congress, you're set for life. You have health insurance. You're good. You and your family are taken care of and provided for. I want those people who are sitting there voting against life-saving measures to wonder what they would do if that was their child, if that was their mother, if that was their aunt, if that was their sister who was having to post on Facebook asking for donations, if that was their son having to run a GoFundMe to raise money for insulin, to raise money for chemotherapy, to raise money for psych meds, or to raise money just so that they have an equal opportunity at life in this country that they've all pledged to support and uphold the Constitution for. It just kind of strikes me as odd that people play party line so hard that they would be willing to let people suffer for the perception of their fellow party members. And like I've said, and I'll continue saying with every breath I have, like, this is a matter of life or death for millions of Americans. That vote that they have holds so much power. The fact that over 190 people sat there in that chamber and voted to say, no, your life does not matter. That's what it felt like. That's what it felt like sitting there watching that vote happen. That's what it feels like every time I watch a congressional session with my students, who I am trying to teach to be global citizens, to be aware of what's happening around them. They sat there and saw with me a vote that said, if you are sick, you are less of a person than someone who is not. And I want people who voted against this, people who support those legislators who vote against these measures, you are voting against humanity, you're voting against decency, and you're voting against equality in so many different ways. when you deny people access to medical care, to medical access, and to quality preventative medical care. We should not have to suffer. We should not have to wait. We should not have to die for insulin. Got it?
Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. And for you, how do you think, and I'm going to ask the senator this, I'm going to ask Ivana this, but how do you think we can effectively get the word out to others like yourself who maybe are impacted by this about the need and the policies behind lowering drug costs? What do you think needs to happen at this moment? Jamie, that's for you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were talking to one of the senators. Sorry, can you repeat that real quick? I'm so sorry.
I said, yeah, no problem. So how can we effectively get the word out to others like you who maybe are impacted by this, or like me, who have family members who are impacted by this, about these policies, number one, but number two, how they can get involved and how they can make their voices heard on this critical issue?
I think by continuing to speak up, it's making a difference. Like I said, I am typically every other Thursday, I'm at the CCSD boardroom. I'm getting messages as I sit here. Where are you? Why aren't you here? Like, you're not on the live stream. Did I miss you? And I'm like, well, no, I'm doing something else. So people know me. People know what I'm passionate about. I've been up to Carson City. I actually met Senator Donate up at the education legislative hearing back last April. I speak up because for so long, I felt like I didn't have a voice. And so many times I have seen people vote against me, vote against my family. And that's what they're doing. When I had to become medically independent as a minor, it was because my parents had other children at home, right? So me becoming medically independent allowed them the financial freedom to care for my siblings who didn't ask for a sick sister, who didn't ask to be put into financial discomfort because I was sick, right? So my illness impacted my entire family. So me speaking up helps other people see that it's possible, and it is scary. And I think, I have to be open about that. Every time I go to a board meeting, I'm shaking inside. When I go up to Carson City, I'm shaking. Even sitting here, I'm sitting in my classroom. This is like my domain. I was like logging on to the Zoom. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm shaking. But it has to be done, because when people don't speak up, it allows those who vote against us to say, see, there's no problems. And I want to showcase those problems because there are solutions. And so I encourage people to, message me. I always tell people, if you're scared to go speak, I'll stand with you. I'll go to the podium and I'll put my hand on your shoulder. I'll hold your hand if you need me to, but I need you to speak too. Because if it's always me, I'm very easy to tune out, right? I've seen myself called a plethora of names. I've seen people dismiss me, and I am one voice in a sea of many. We need more people to speak up. We need more people to write to legislators. We need more people to come on to calls like this, to get involved, to ask questions, and to let us know that their stories are out there. My story is my story. There are ones similar to it, but there's no story that's just like mine, because there are so many stories. Everyone has that individual thing that needs to be shared. And while I might be one voice, together we can build a chorus. And I think that's what really needs to happen. I need those other people. I need you to, swallow those butterflies and speak up, because when you speak up, it activates change.
Well, you're doing a great job at that, Jamie. And just so everybody knows at home, Jamie is a part of our story bank. And if y'all want to join our story bank, Brenda, who's our story bank organizer, has put her information in the chat, so you can get involved with our story bank too, and have cool opportunities like the one that Jamie has had with Congresswoman Titus and others. So please join us, because we need your voice on this issue and so many others. Ivana, I want to come back to you. So now you work for Governor Sisolak. You're doing incredible things as his chief of staff. He has been a champion on the issue of healthcare during his time, and his administration has done a lot of work on this issue. So Governor Sisolak just announced at his State of the State address that Nevada is joining the Northwest Prescription Drug Consortium. We talked about that a few times tonight. But I want to know, what was the process of getting involved in that program? How and when can Nevadans participate? And what does that actually mean? Because that's a lot of words that I don't think average Nevadans maybe understand how big of a deal that is.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And it's part of Governor Sisolak's commitment to not just lowering the cost of prescription drugs, but to lowering the out-of-pocket costs for working Nevadans that affect their ability to provide for their families, that affect their ability to make decisions for themselves every day. It's why he's focused on lowering healthcare costs, on ensuring that we're getting as many opportunities for people to enter the workforce as possible, on making sure that our economy is bouncing back on track so that people can get back to work, and on making sure that he's putting forward policies that address high costs on things like housing and childcare and healthcare. And prescription drugs is one that falls squarely in line with all of the work he's doing, because we know that there are families that have to make the choices between the medicines they need and keeping lights on. And so the Northwest Drug Consortium is currently made up of Oregon and Washington State, and is something we in Nevada have been talking about for almost two and a half years. During the 2019, following the 2019 session, during the interim, we had an interim study on policy proposals that could lower the prices Nevadans pay for prescription drugs. And the Northwest Drug Consortium came to present. And what we learned then was Oregon and Washington had come together to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs as states and bring in better deals for their people. And Nevada will now join them. And what it creates is a drug card where people can have access to lower prices to prescription drugs when they go to the pharmacy to pick up their medications. And rather than be negotiated through a corporation, there are lots of drug coupon type programs. This is negotiated directly by states for their people. We've seen the program save people in Oregon and Washington hundreds of millions of dollars since its inception. And we are now doing the work to stand up the program in Nevada. It's going to take a few months of ramp up time to get everything up and running. And then we will execute it with a full marketing campaign and make sure that people in the state are aware of the benefit. And it's open to anyone, regardless of their insurance status. You can have super premium insurance or be uninsured. The program will still benefit you either way. And I know for Governor Sisolak, these policies are priorities because he understands just how much Nevadans benefit when they're able to have their dollars go farther and when they're able to benefit from our recovery. And I know that he wakes up every day thinking about Nevadans who are struggling and thinking about how to make life better for them. And it's why it's such an honor and a privilege to get to work for him.
Well, we're excited about this Sisolak bounce back ourselves. And we are excited about the consortium. And I personally am excited about it because, you know, I have decent insurance through BBP, but my asthma medications cost me a lot of money. And I am excited to be able to use this for my prescription drugs going forward. So please thank him for us, because I think this is awesome. So Senator, I want to come back to you now. You know, I want to talk about 2023, you know, goddess willing, we go into the 2023 session able to do some good stuff again. And what, if anything, is on the horizon for 2023's session that you're excited about, particularly on the subject of lowering drug costs and healthcare?
Sure. There are a lot of things that are in stake right now. We have made progress, as we mentioned today, with the state legislature to enact transparency programs, to allow for the compact agreements, but we're not done yet. And of course, we've learned just from hearing Jamie's story that those frustrations are very real and they still exist. So whatever policy proposals that are out there right now, the best thing that you can do if you're listening today is to get involved right now and to send us your emails, your texts, your tweets. Most of us are pretty accessible and we read them. Our contact information is displayed online, and reach out to us, because right now during an interim, that's when the actual work comes into play. That this is the moment when we're starting to draft our bills, when we're starting to pull everyone together, build the coalitions. And then when you identify your frustrations, turn that into your passion in this November by going out to vote. That's how we get in place the leaders that we need to prioritize this issue for the next legislative session. We can't do the good work that we need to increase access to healthcare. We can't advocate for public health if we don't have the votes or the legislators to do so. So making sure that your voice is prioritized during this process is the first step in making that achievable. So hopefully that inspires some folks that are listening to get involved, because we need your voice.
Well, and I think today is a great example of why elections matter. We have a new Supreme Court justice. I couldn't leave this show without saying that. It makes me so happy. For once in my life, I get to be happy about something. And she's going to be incredible. And she brings diversity of thought and diversity of background to the Supreme Court now. And I think, seeing that elections matter, and elections matter on so many issues that we work on, like healthcare, like prescription drug costs. So this is Amber's question from the audience for you, Senator. What can the average person, average Nevadan, do to encourage their elected officials to act on this issue and act quickly?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. So the best way that you can do is to get in contact with us. There are plenty of ways that you can contact us. Either you can write us letters, you can request meetings with us, and we will go out and have coffee with you to talk about these issues. For the most part, we will not only hear from you, but we will take on this issue and help you solve it. And then from there, once you already establish what actions we need to take, just keep involved. As legislators, a lot of us, because we are a citizen-led legislature, we have full-time jobs and we balance different priorities. So making sure that this issue for you is on our priority list is probably the main important thing. So just, again, it's easy to lose hope when we're dealing with these circumstances and when we see these things happen to our community members and to our families. But as long as we are relentless in our ways of enacting change, then that's the main thing that we have to remember as we go out and reach out to these elected officials. And, change will come. So hopefully that inspires someone to reach out.
And Will, just one other question from the audience for you. Marty asked, does this apply to diabetic drugs besides insulin? And I'm guessing that's on the federal bill. Does it, other than insulin, does it apply to the other things that Jamie was talking about, like pumps and things like that?
Yes. So Jamie actually may be able to speak to this a little bit better, but basically it's $35. The way that the House bill passed, there's a cap at $35 per month for a 1-month supply of what is needed for somebody like Jamie and other diabetics to stay alive. So the insulin, and then the components of that medicine's delivery. Jamie, you may be able to answer that better.
So as far as I understand the bill as it's written, I believe it's like a per item thing. So like I take 2 insulin. So each insulin would be capped at $35. So that would be $70. As far as the equipment, like things like continuous glucose monitors, like my Dexcom or an insulin pump, those are considered durable medical equipment. So I'm not sure how that would be categorized. So for example, like the insulin pump, that's like a permanent fixture, but there's the components that go with it that would be changed out weekly. My Dexcoms right now last for 10 days. Every 10 days I change it out. So there's multiple components to it that would have to be looked at and be fully addressed. Because I'm not 100% sure on the full logistics of it. I know there's some wording that's got people concerned about people who are not insured whatsoever. If this would just cover already insured or people who are underinsured versus completely uninsured. So there's some wording that I think is still a little messy that has to kind of be looked at, because things like that durable medical equipment would also have to be taken into consideration, because that does drive up the expense.
And if I may, and Annette, Jamie, I'm just going to reference some of my notes real quick. That's just the easiest thing to do. So speaking just about the House bill that passed last week, for commercial plans, that applies to one of each dosage form, i.e. vial, pump, inhaler of each different type of insulin, rapid acting, short acting, intermediate acting, long acting, ultra long acting, and pre-mixed. For a Medicare plan, this applies to all covered insulin products, and copays are capped at $35 for all preferred and non-preferred products included on plan formularies. And basically what the legislation did was cap out-of-pocket cost of insulin products at $35 per month for people with insurance, whether that's a commercial plan or people who are enrolled in Medicare.
Thank you for that, Will. All right, Ivana, I want to come to you first. Final thoughts for this episode, the good work that you've done previously, the good work that Governor Sisolak is doing on this and many different issues, and how you think we should continue moving forward on this issue.
I think what Senator Donato said is spot on. It takes involvement. It takes working with our elected officials. It takes telling stories. It's really important that forums like these are utilized to learn, to engage, and that folks reach out to their elected officials. We have so many opportunities right now because we are in between legislative sessions. And so it's a great opportunity to talk about policy ideas with legislators, to ask about budget priorities, and to work with elected officials, with staff, to get involved and make your voices heard. We can only be as good as we can only solve for the problems and be as good as the problems we know about. We can't solve what we don't know. And so it's really important that folks speak up, bring ideas forward, and stay involved.
And how do folks reach out to Governor Sisolak's office, both in Northern Nevada and in Southern Nevada, because you're in both places?
We have full offices in both the North and the South, and we are available by phone, on social media, by email. Our staff is very active. We do our best to be responsive. So folks can do everything from come and set up an interview with a caseworker to help navigate state government, all the way to send us tweets and ask us about issues. We do our best to be as responsive as possible.
Absolutely, you are. And we will put the governor's office's numbers and contact information in the chat. So if you want to get a hold of Governor Sisolak's amazing team, you can do that. And we reach out to them all the time on various issues. We were just working with them on the housing issue today. That was before interim finance. We're going to have a whole special on that next week, and we'll talk more about that in a few seconds. But please reach out to their office because they're doing amazing work all across the state. Will, same question for you. How do folks get involved? How do they make their voices heard? And how do we move this federal legislation forward right now?
Yeah, it's been said, but it bears repeating. Making your voice heard, whether that is sending an email, picking up the phone, going to a town hall. And then, when people are doing things that you support, going and finding people like Annette and find a packet of turf and go and walk that turf and go sit in a phone bank and try to keep people in office who are doing things that demonstrably improve your lives. And I have to say, I've mentioned them a few times tonight, but I'd be remiss talking about federal legislation if I didn't again. You have some true champions as your representative in Nevada, and both of your U.S. senators and Senators Rosen and Senator Cortez Masto, and in the House, people like Congressman Horsford, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Titus. They are constantly talking about this, whether that's at a town hall setting or a hearing right here in Washington, D.C., or organizing themselves and their other legislatures, writing letters to the president, writing letters to House and Senate leadership, demanding that we have to make this happen. And the chief reason they do that is because it's the right thing. And they know it's the right thing to do because they hear voices like yours day in and day out in their capacities as your representatives.
And remind folks that even if they do support these bills, it's still important for them to hear from you. And Congressman Amade should be hearing from folks too, because we have people who watch all across the state. So all of our elected officials should be hearing from our folks. Will, that's for you. Just quick reminder on how that works, since you're the lobbyist in the room.
Yes, indeed. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to get a hold of your legislator. If you really have, if you're watching this, you have a computer, right? I guess. So if you just type in U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, you can call a number, you type in your, press in your zip code, they will connect you to your elected official. They also have email addresses. I would also ask, Annette and the whole team at Battleborn can absolutely get you connected with me. And if you ever have a question about a piece of legislation or how somebody is voting on something, or any kind of message that you would like to get to them, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. You obviously have Annette and a tremendous team at Battleborn who's doing just awesome work constantly. But I would want you to know that I want to be a resource for you in any way that I can be as well.
Yeah, and we just put the Capitol switchboard in the chat as well. So this way, if y'all want to reach out to your congressional members or your senators federally, you can do that also. And thank you, Will, for your kind words. All right, Jamie, you get the last word tonight. Talk to us about why folks should get involved, how they should get involved, and why their voices matter.
So I have a little bit of a funny story about that. Before Biden and Harris were in office, I actually went to an event where Kamala Harris was going to be speaking, and I was standing in line talking to this really nice lady, like having like this 40-minute conversation. And it was Congressman Horsford's mother. No idea. But she'd mention her son, but not by name, anything like that. And no idea. But politicians are out in the community with us, right? They're not on pedestals. And if they've put themselves on a pedestal, they probably need to be knocked off of it a little bit. I'm really active on Twitter with a lot of political types, except for Danny Tarkanian, and he blocked me. But I've actually found that that's really good engagement. A lot of them are very active on social media nowadays. And I've been able to connect with many people. I've connected with several people in the state assembly and Senate because I'm just online and I'm like, hey, can we talk about this? Or, hey, can you come talk to my kids about this? I think it's really important to stay active, to stay up to date with what's happening at the state and federal level. As a high school teacher, I feel like it's my duty to make sure that my kids are politically aware. A lot of my students are first generation. So, their parents oftentimes aren't super tuned into what's going on. So I'm like, you guys have to be the ones, right? So that you guys know what kind of world you're graduating yourselves into. I think just making sure you know what's happening, making sure if it's something that you care about, you connect with people who care about those same issues. We can do so much more when we're banded together. And there's people out there that care about every issue. It can be a little hard to get started, but it's worth it to find your group and to learn about your issue and to learn how to use your voice. And at the end of the day, that's what I encourage everyone to do. I used to be a super quiet, meek, shy person. People who know me now were like, no, not you. But it took me finding my moment, finding my why about what I care about and why I care about it to start speaking. And when people find their why, I think they're able to go out and they'll able to be change makers. And that's what we need. We need change makers in society, not people who sit in the back row and just watch.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jamie, for joining us. And thank you, Will and Ivana, for joining us as well and spending your evening with us. We greatly appreciate all the hard work that you all do. And just so you all know, at home, like I said earlier, we are going to have a special next week on the housing crisis here in Nevada and what Governor Sisolak and his amazing team are doing about the housing crisis here in Nevada and what happened today in the interim finance committee. So you're not going to want to miss the episode next week. That'll be live at 5 on all of our Battleborn Progress pages, YouTube and Twitch. So make sure you're joining us. We will be back with you next Thursday live at 5 talking about housing. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Stay safe and keep safe. Make sure you're staying healthy. You know, COVID's still a thing. So talk to y'all soon. Stay safe.